For some reason, I keep thinking that I've already made a video about Gloucester Road Tube Station, but despite all this footage in my archive, it seems that I haven't. Well, I suppose I might as well correct that. Gloucester Road is a station in West London that's on the District, Circle and Piccadilly lines of the Underground. But it was actually built for the Metropolitan line, as the sign on the outside says. As if that wasn't enough, it has 2 station buildings and an abandoned platform. So what exactly is going on here? Let's look into the history of Gloucester Road. What it all comes down to is the Circle line. Now, I've talked about this many times on this channel, so apologies to my regular viewers, but to briefly sum up. The Metropolitan line started out as the Metropolitan Railway in 1863 and only ran from Farringdon to Paddington. The railway's engineer, John Fowler, recommended extending it to form a circular route that would connect most of the main line railway stations together. This was known as the Inner Circle, but now, of course, is the Circle line. The Metropolitan would extend to South Kensington in the west and Tower Hill in the east. For the bit between them, a new company was formed, the Metropolitan District Railway, commonly known as the District Railway. 4 members of the district's board of directors were also on the Metropolitan Board, and John Fowler was the chief engineer for the district. Basically, this legally separate company would deal with the hassle of raising funds and building the most difficult part of the railway, while the Metropolitan did its Metropolitan thing. And when it was complete, the 2 companies would amalgamate. It didn't quite work out that way. In fact, the 2 companies would end up in a years-long feud that meant the Circle wasn't completed until 1884. Anyway, Gloucester Road was on the Metropolitan Railway's section of the Circle. So that was lucky because the Metropolitan's bits got built pretty quickly. Gloucester Road was on the bit from Paddington to South Kensington and opened on the 1st of October 1868. For a couple of months, it was actually the terminus before the line was extended further to South Kensington to link up with the district. That being done, district trains could also operate into Gloucester Road. These days, I always think it feels a little claustrophobic, but when it was first built, it had a grand overall roof, much like the one at Notting Hill Gate. It also had more platforms than it needs today. The reason being that the district and metropolitan railways would have their own track and therefore their own platforms. They had 2 platforms each. These days the arrangement is rather different. 1 district platform westbound, 1 circle platform westbound, and 1 platform eastbound shared between 2 lines. This leaves 1 platform disused, and it's now used to house art installations. The station name was a bit of an oddity. Originally it was known as Brompton Gloucester Road, but it was shown on signs as Gloucester Road Station Brompton and Gloucester Road for Brompton. Maps often showed it as Gloucester Road, sometimes abbreviated. It wasn't until 1906, when the Piccadilly line arrived, that the whole thing was standardised. Gloucester Road was intended to prompt development in the area. Much of the circle would run through areas that were heavily built up and therefore expensive to build through. But in the west it was still rather green and pleasant, and therefore cheap. The existence of a railway here drove the construction of housing, and the ensuing decades would see much of the greenery built over. Actually, this would end up being one of the reasons the district and metropolitan railways fell out. The district was short of money, so concentrated on building cheap lines in the west over completing the circle. But that wasn't all. The Metropolitan weren't giving district trains enough slots in the timetable. The district wanted to run a train every 5 minutes. The Met only allowed them half of that. And so we got the first illegal tube line in 1871, the Cromwell Curve, between High Street Kensington and Gloucester Road. A district-only line built without parliamentary authorisation, so that the district wouldn't have to pay the Met to use their track over that section. So how do you get away with building an illegal tube line? I mean, it's not like putting a lean-to on your house. People are going to notice there's a railway there. Well, basically, the land the Cromwell Curve was built on was already owned by the district. There was legal precedent for building track on privately owned land without parliamentary authorisation. The problem was that when the district's Act of Parliament had been passed, a curve like this actually was discussed and specifically struck out, which the Metropolitan used as grounds to dispute it. The whole thing would remain fairly acrimonious up until as late as 1903, and in the end it was all pointless. The district hardly ever used the curve in the end. It would later be built over. Now the Sainsbury's sits on top of where it was. The station quickly began to suffer from overcrowding. With two busy lines running trains into Gloucester Road, it was easy for the exits to become congested. What didn't help was that back then the lines operated first, second and third class compartments on their trains, meaning that you not only had to find your train but the right part of it. In 1901, the District Railway was bought out by the syndicate run by Charles Tyson Yerkes, which would become Underground Electric Railways of London. This buyout had actually started as a modernisation programme. At the end of the 19th century, the District Railway was operating using elderly steam engines and carriages, at a time when electric trains were the wave of the future, or possibly current of the future. As a result of this modernisation process, Gloucester Road was partially rebuilt. That overall roof was removed. A few years later, another UERL venture would make its appearance. The Great Northern Piccadilly and Brompton Railway, better known now as the Piccadilly Line. Now, the story of how the Piccadilly Line came to be is an immensely complicated one, but the bit through Gloucester Road actually started out as the District Line. Kind of. Basically, the District Line was pretty congested in its central London portion, so what they wanted to do was build a deep-level express line from Mansion House to Earl's Court with a single intermediate station at Charing Cross, now Embankment. In fact, they got parliamentary authorisation to build it. When the district was bought out by UERL inherited those rights. They combined the deep-level district with the London United Electric Railway, the Great Northern and Strand Railway, and the Brompton and Piccadilly Circus Railway, all of which they had also bought before construction began. And the end result was the Piccadilly Line. The Piccadilly arrived at Gloucester Road in December 1906, hence the fact that that's when the station name was settled on. Although the two lines were part of the same system run by the same company, the Piccadilly platforms got a separate building. That's because space was needed for lifts. The original building was quite crowded enough. This is one of Leslie Green's works with its classic oxblood tiled frontage. These buildings were designed like a skyscraper around a steel frame so they could be extended upwards, not that that happened here. At platform level, Green stations all had coloured tiling unique to each stop, enabling regular commuters to instantly know where they were. The ones at Gloucester Road tend to be very highly rated by architecture enthusiasts, or at least the ones I read for this video. In 1970, the District and Circle station was rebuilt. One of the old Metropolitan tracks, by now only used by Circle trains, was removed and the island platform was widened to fill its space. In the 1990s, more work was done. The station was built over with a shopping centre and a block of flats, which is why Gloucester Road is enclosed. That being said, it's not all bad. Many older features of the station have been restored, such as the globe-shaped lighting and some of the fancier architectural features on the outside. The Piccadilly street-level entrance is no longer in use, and you now enter the old District and Metropolitan building through the side rather than the front. In 2000, the Platform for Art programme began, making the disused part of the station a platform for art. To be honest, this whole thing was an excuse to talk about a station I really rather like, but don't get to use that much. Gloucester Road has many features that merit a look, and despite my complaints about the development on top, it is one of my favourites from an aesthetic perspective. It might not be very bright, but it still shines. In its own way. I hope you enjoyed this artistic tale from the tube. If you did, a like would be appreciated, as would subscribing if you're not already subscribed. My main sources today were the Metropolitan District Railway by Charles E. Lee, London's Underground Station by Lawrence Minnear, the Underground Stations of Leslie Green by David Leboff, the Piccadilly Tube by Mike Horn, and London's District Railway, also by Mike Horn. I would like as ever to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your support. You are the Piccadilly entrance to my district station. And I will see you all again very soon. Cheerio.